On November 29, 2009, 4 police officers of Lakewood, Washington were fatally shot at the Forza, now Blue Steel, coffee shop in the Parkland unincorporated area of Pierce County, Washington, near Tacoma. Hey, welcome to True Crime Travel Map. This is a podcast based off a map I've been putting together of all real true crime locations. You guys can see that map at truecrimetravelmap.com. That being said, let's just get into this week's episode. Alright, so this week we're going to Washington, Tacoma, Washington to be exact, to go over the 2009 Lakewood shooting. A gunman later identified as Maurice Clemmons entered the shop, shot the officers while they were working on laptops, and fled the scene with a single gunshot wound to his torso. After a massive 2-day manhunt that spanned several nearby cities, an officer recognized Clemmons near a stalled car in South Seattle. When he refused orders to stop, he was shot and killed by a Seattle Police Department officer. 5 people, all friends and family of Clemmons, were convicted of crimes associated with aiding his escape and enabling him to elude capture, but most convictions were reversed on appeal based on court findings of misconduct by the Pierce County Prosecutor's Office. Clemmons' shooting of the Lakewood officers was initially thought to have been part of a targeted attack by multiple persons against police officers in the Seattle-Tacoma area, but these actions are now considered unrelated. Seattle police officer Timothy Brenton was murdered a month earlier under similar circumstances. 3 weeks later, on December 21st in Eatonville, 2 Pierce County Sheriff deputies were shot and critically injured. One later died of his wounds. That gunman was shot dead and returned fire. At the time, the Lakewood shooting was both the second deadliest attack on law enforcement in the United States since the March 21, 2009 fatal shootings of 4 Oakland, California police officers, as well as the second deadliest attack on law enforcement in a single incident by a single gunman. The 4 Lakewood police officers were the first to be killed in the line of duty since the department was established in 2004. Maurice Clemmons was identified as the shooter in the November 29, 2009 murder of 4 police officers in Parkland, Washington. After evading police for 2 days following the shooting, Clemmons was shot and killed by a police officer in Seattle. Prior to his involvement in the shooting, Clemmons had 5 felony convictions in Arkansas and 8 felony charges in Washington. His first incarceration began in 1989 at age 17. Although his sentences totaled 108 years in prison, those for burglary were reduced in 2000 by Governor of Arkansas Mike Huckabee to 47 years, which made him immediately eligible for parole. The Arkansas Parole Board unanimously moved to release him in 2000. Clemmons was subsequently arrested on other charges and was jailed several times. In the months prior to the Parkland shooting, he was in jail on charges of assaulting a police officer and essaying a child. 1 week prior to the Parkland shooting, he was released from jail after posting a $150,000 bail bond. At the time, Clemmons' murder of 4 police officers represented the largest number of law enforcement officers killed by a lone perpetrator in a single incident in U.S. history. It was surpassed in July 2016 when a mass shooting occurred in Dallas, Texas, resulting in the deaths of 5 police officers. Clemmons lived in Marianna, Arkansas in his early youth and moved to Little Rock as a teen. Clemmons eventually dropped out of high school his junior year. In 1989, a 17-year-old Clemmons and 2 other accomplices robbed a woman at midnight in the parking lot of a Little Rock hotel bar. Clemmons pretended to have a gun in his pocket and threatened to shoot her if she did not give him her purse. When she responded, "Well, why don't you just shoot?" he punched her in the head and ran off with her purse, which contained $16 and a credit card. A court sentenced Clemmons to 35 years imprisonment for the crime. Clemmons was accused multiple times of displaying violent behavior during court appearances. In one incident, he managed to dismantle a metal doorstop, hiding it in his sock to use it as a weapon. It was discovered and confiscated by a court bailiff. In another incident, he took a lock from his holding cell and threw it at a bailiff, but he missed, hitting his mother instead. Clemmons was once accused of reaching for a guard's pistol while being transported to court. During one trial, he was shackled in leg irons and seated next to a uniformed officer because the presiding judge had ordered extra security, claiming Clemmons had threatened him. At age 16, Clemmons' charges were transferred from juvenile court to adult court due to the extremely violent nature of his crimes and his threatening demeanor. By 1990, Clemmons was sentenced to 108 years in prison for 8 felony charges from his teenage years in Arkansas. The total prison term stemmed from multiple sentences, some of which were concurrent to others, while others were consecutive. The heaviest sentence came in 1990 when he was given a 60-year prison term for breaking into an Arkansas state trooper's home and stealing $6,700 in property, including a gun. During his sentencing on the charges, a circuit judge told Clemmons that he had broken his mother's heart, to which he responded, "I have broken my own heart." In 1989, Clemmons was sentenced to 35 years in prison for his 1989 robbery in the parking lot of the Little Rock Hotel bar. Among his other sentences were 6 years for weapons possession based on his high school arrest, and 8 years for burglary, theft, and probation violation in Pulaski County. He was ineligible for parole until at least 2015. Clemmons was initially held at the Tucker Correctional Facility in Tucker, Arkansas, and was eventually transferred to the Cummins Unit near Grady. In 1999, after having served 10 years of his sentence, Clemmons filed a clemency appeal with Arkansas's Governor Mike Huckabee. In his petition to Huckabee, Clemmons wrote that he came from a very good Christian family and was raised much better than my actions speak. Clemmons claimed that he had just moved from Seattle, Washington to Arkansas as a teenager, and because he had no friends, he gave in to peer pressure and fell in with the wrong crowd. He tried to be accepted by his young peers, which led him to commit the crimes. Although he apologized for his actions, Clemmons also complained that he received overly harsh sentences. He also claimed to have changed and expressed regret to his mother, who had recently died without seeing him turn his life around. Clemmons' clemency application was supported by Pulaski County Circuit Court Judge Marion Humphrey, who argued the cumulative sentence was excessive and cited Clemmons' young age at the time he committed the crimes. The decision was made over the objections of some victims and prosecutors involved in Clemmons' previous cases, but was supported by the bipartisan parole board and the trial court judge in Clemmons' case. Mark Frazier, an attorney who prosecuted earlier cases against Clemmons in Pulaski County, argued Clemmons was extremely likely to commit further actions of violence in the future, and said for a teen to receive such a lengthy prison sentence without committing a murder, you've got to be a bad little dude. On May 3, 2000, Huckabee commuted Clemmons' 108-year sentence to 47 years, 5 months, and 19 days, which made him eligible for parole that day. As a factor in his decision, Huckabee cited the unusually long sentence for Clemmons' age at the time the crimes were committed. The Arkansas Parole Board unanimously approved Clemmons' release date on July 13, 2000, and he was set free on August 1, 2000. Less than a year after his release in March 2001, Clemmons violated parole by committing aggravated robbery and theft yet again in Ouachita County. He was convicted on July 13, 2001 and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He faced charges of parole violation, but due to problems with the case, he was not served with the charges until 2004. His attorney argued the parole violations charges should be dropped, as much time had passed. Subsequently, those charges were dismissed. Clemmons was granted parole on the robbery charges in 2004. Clemmons told the parole board he was not ready the first time he was released, but he didn't want to die in prison, and now he would try to do the right thing. Clemmons moved to Washington in 2004 while still on parole, which was approved by Arkansas authorities. That year, he married a woman named Nicole Smith. The Seattle Times later reported the relationship had been tumultuous. He was placed under the supervision of the Washington State Department of Corrections and classified as high risk to reoffend. His supervision was to continue until October 2005. He lives in Tacoma, where he ran a landscaping and power washing business out of his house. Over the next 5 years, Clemmons was able to purchase 6 houses, including 1 in Arkansas and 5 in Washington. Following his parole in 2004, Clemmons had no arrests or problems with the law until May 2009. The Seattle Times noted 4 days in May 2009 as the time that Maurice Clemmons' behavior and mental state deteriorated. On May 9th, a Pierce County Sheriff's deputy responded to Clemmons' home after reports that he was throwing rocks at houses, cars, and people. When the deputy tried to enter the house, one of Clemmons' cousins grabbed his wrist. After a struggle, Clemmons emerged from the house and punched the deputy in the face, then assaulted a second deputy who arrived to help. Clemmons was placed under arrest and taken to Pierce County Jail, where he continued to struggle and told jail workers, "I'll kill all you bitches." He was charged with 2 felony assault charges and 2 felony malicious mischief charges, and released from jail the next day after posting a $40,000 bail bond without ever seeing a judge. On May 11, 2009, around 1 a.m., Clemmons appeared naked in his living room and ordered 2 female relatives, ages 11 and 12, to perform inappropriate acts. The 2 reportedly complied out of fear, and the 11-year-old fled the house afterwards. Clemmons took the 12-year-old into his bedroom along with Clemmons' wife. Clemmons repeatedly referred to himself as Jesus and said his wife was Eve. He released the 12-year-old after his wife begged him to let her go. However, around 4 a.m. that same morning, he gathered his family back into the living room and demanded they strip naked together. He later left the house, claiming the world was coming to an end and that he was going to fly to heaven. A family member called 911. Police found Clemmons at a nearby second house that he was building for himself, but he fled on foot and escaped. Clemmons failed to appear the next day for an arraignment on his May 9th charges. Child Protective Services investigated and substantiated the SA complaint. Clemmons' sister told authorities he had undergone a change and was not in his right mind. Clemmons was arrested on July 1st, 2009, after he appeared in a Pierce County court trying to have his bench warrant thrown out. He was charged with second-degree SA of a child and with being a fugitive from Arkansas. At the time of his arrest, Clemmons made religiously themed comments and referred to himself as the Beast. He also told a police officer that then President Barack Obama and LeBron James were his brothers, and Oprah Winfrey was his sister. Pierce County prosecutors asserted that Clemmons' recent crimes amounted to a violation of Clemmons' parole in Arkansas, and that he faced years in prison if he was returned to that state. However, the Arkansas Department of Community Correction notified Pierce County on July 22, 2009, that they did not intend to ask for his extradition, and that he should just be adjudicated on his Washington charges. Stephen Penner, a deputy prosecuting attorney in Pierce County, said of the Arkansas decision, "There's a built-in incentive to not following through. In a way, the more violent they are, the less you want them in your community." During a court-ordered mental health evaluation, Clemmons told psychologists he had experienced hallucinations in May of 2009 of, quote, "people drinking blood and people eating babies, and lawless on the streets, like people were cannibals," end quote. He claimed that the visions since had passed. He also claimed to have no faith in the American justice system, and thought he was being, quote, "maliciously persecuted because I'm black and they believe the police," end quote. The evaluation completed by 2 psychologists from the Western State Hospital on October 19th concluded Clemmons was dangerous and presented an increased risk of future criminal acts. Pierce County Judge John McCarthy set bail for Clemmons' assault charges at $40,000, considerably below the $100,000 prosecutors sought based on Clemmons' history of violence. Pierce County Judge Thomas Felnagel set bail for the child SA charges at $150,000, lower than the $200,000 sought by prosecutors, but higher than usual for the charges. After a mental evaluation, a psychologist concluded Clemmons was compliant to stand trial on the charges, which eliminated him from a candidate of involuntary commitment. An attorney for Clemmons notified the court that he planned to pursue an insanity or diminished capacity defense. On November 23, 2009, Clemmons paid $15,000 for a $190,000 bail bond to secure his release. 2 other bail bond agencies had earlier rejected Clemmons' bond request based on his history of failing to appear in court. On the morning of Sunday, November 29, 2009, the 4 officers were working on their laptops at the Forza Coffee company shop, now Blue Steel Coffee, prior to the start of their shift in nearby Parkland, next to McCord Air Force Base. All 4 men were armed and in full uniform, wearing bulletproof vests. Clemmons drove a white pickup truck to getaway driver Dorcas Allen's home. Allen then drove Clemmons past the coffee shop. After they saw marked police patrol cars in the parking lot, Allen drove Clemmons back past the coffee shop and parked nearby. Allen stayed behind and kept the truck running while Clemmons exited the vehicle and made his way toward the Forza coffee shop. At approximately 8:15 a.m., Clemmons entered the Forza Coffee shop, approached the counter, and turned toward the four-seated officers. Without saying a word, Clemmons drew a Glock 17 9mm handgun and opened fire. Clemmons also carried an illegal obtained Smith & Wesson .38 caliber revolver. Clemmons was legally barred from possessing any weapon in Washington state due to prior felony convictions. Sergeant Mark Renninger and Officer Tina Griswold were targeted first. They were both shot in the head and killed almost instantly while they remained seated. In the aftermath, it was revealed that the four officers had hardly any time to react to the violent surprise attack. The shooting was considered an ambush. Officer Ronald Owens was fatally shot in the neck as he stood up attempting to draw his weapon. Clemmons then fired upon Officer Greg Richards, striking him in the head. Before Richards succumbed to his mortal head wound, he was able to draw his weapon and return fire. Richards' bullet struck Clemmons in the abdomen. A wounding and bleeding Clemmons stole the dying Richards' Glock 40 Smith & Wesson service weapon. Clemmons fled the scene, stepping over the slain officers and leaving behind a trail of blood and DNA evidence. Investigators later utilized the DNA evidence left behind, among other pieces of evidence, including the shop's recorded video surveillance footage and eyewitness testimony, to undoubtedly link Clemmons to the murders. Shortly after the shooting, Clemmons was observed exiting the coffee shop, jogging down the block, and entering through the passenger side door of a white pickup truck parked a short distance from the coffee shop. The getaway vehicle quickly sped away from the scene and was presumably driven by Clemmons' accomplice, Dorcius Allen. Clemmons drove a white pickup truck to the getaway driver Dorcius Allen's home. Investigators stated that the murders were an attack against police officers in general, since none of the four officers had ever dealt personally with Clemmons. None of the officers were individually targeted, as Clemmons shot at all four officers indiscriminately. Robbery was quickly ruled out as a motive, as Clemmons stole a single service weapon from one of the four officers, but it was believed he did so as a means to further commit later attacks against other members of law enforcement. In the aftermath of the November 29th attack, criminal profilers revealed that Clemmons' modus operandi was to simply kill as many police officers as he could, and it was believed that Clemmons planned and intended to violently target more officers in the days following the initial Lakewood shooting. Allen later told detectives that he stopped at an intersection and abandoned Clemmons and the truck, claiming he wanted no part of this, but police found no evidence Allen had abandoned his vehicle. The afternoon following the shooting, the Pierce County Sheriff identified Maurice Clemmons as a suspected murderer, saying that he had a long, violent criminal history in Arkansas and Washington. Police confirmed that Clemmons had been shot in the abdomen during the attack and advised hospitals to be aware. In the late evening hours of November 29th, Seattle police believed they had Clemmons surrounded in a home in the Leschi area of Seattle. With air support provided by King County Sheriff's Office, SWAT teams from the King County Sheriff's Office, the Seattle Police Department, Tacoma Police Department, and other agencies, they entered the home after a 12-hour standoff, but they found no one inside. With air support provided by King County Sheriff's Office, SWAT teams from the King County Sheriff's Office, the Seattle Police Department, Tacoma Police Department, and other agencies, they entered the home after a 12-hour standoff, but they found no one inside. Earlier that day, Tacoma police served a search warrant on a Tacoma home belonging to a person of interest and collected some evidence. An intense manhunt ensued, and police from agencies in Pierce and King counties conducted searches at the University of Washington campus, Rizal Park, and in Renton, without any success. Acting on a tip, King County Sheriff deputies and Washington State Parole troopers were also conducting surveillance and going door to door at Snoqualmie Pass area homes 50 miles east of Seattle. After hours of investigating, that search was called off. The tip had been one of thousands received by local law enforcement agencies. The police were now offering a $145,000 reward for information leading to Clemmons' arrest. Having evaded police for 2 days, Clemmons was located on December 1st. He was shot and killed by a Seattle police officer. Around 2:45 a.m. on December 1st, Seattle police officer Benjamin L. Kelly was on patrol in the Brighton neighborhood of South Seattle in Rainier Valley. He came upon a 1990 Acura Integra parked on the street at 44th Place South and South Kenyon Street. It was empty, but the hood was raised and the engine was running. He ran the vehicle's license plate number and determined that it had been stolen about 2 hours earlier. While sitting in his patrol car to report the stolen vehicle, Kelly noticed a man matching Clemmons' description approaching him from behind, walking first on the sidewalk and then in the middle of the street. Police accounts state that Kelly confronted Clemmons and ordered him to stop and show his hands, but Clemmons began to flee around the disabled vehicle and reportedly, quote, reached into his waist area and moved, end quote, as Kelly was drawing his sidearm. Kelly fired 3 shots at Clemmons, followed by another 4 shots as the suspect ran away in a dead sprint. Officer Kelly struck him at least twice. Clemmons reached the sidewalk and collapsed face down in the walkway leading to a home on Kenyon Street. Kelly retreated behind his patrol car, retrieved his shotgun, and called for backup. Within moments, Seattle police came to the scene. A team of officers approached the suspect, handcuffed him, and took him away from the home. Seattle Fire Department medics responded and pronounced the suspect dead at the scene. Clemmons was carrying a handgun, identified as having belonged to a slain officer in the Lakewood shooting. Clemmons had a bullet wound to his abdomen sustained during the shooting in Parkland, which had been stuffed with cotton and gauze and sealed with duct tape. All 4 victims have been with the Lakewood Police Department from its beginning in 2004. Sergeant Mark Reninger, 39, 13 years in law enforcement, died from a gunshot wound to the head. Officer Ronald Owens, 37, 12 years in law enforcement, from Puyallup, died from a gunshot wound to the neck. Officer Trina Griswold, 40, 14 years of law enforcement, died from a gunshot wound to the head. Officer Greg Richards, 42, 8 years of law enforcement experience, from Graham, died from a gunshot wound to the head. Immediately following the shootings, the Lakewood Police Independent Guild set up a memorial fund for the officers. As of 2012, about $3.2 million were donated in the fund. In March 2012, Lakewood police officer Skeeter Timothy Manos pleaded guilty to charges of stealing from the account, using funds for his personal use. The Glock used during the shooting was purchased in June 2005 at a Renton, Washington pawn shop. The purchaser reported the gun stolen in March 2006 after his car was broken into in a downtown Seattle parking garage at 2nd Avenue on James Street. One accomplice has been convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison, while 4 convicted of rendering criminal assistance, including getaway driver Dorcius Allen, had their convictions reversed upon appeal. The trials of accomplices to this crime were marred by prosecutorial misconduct, with many reversals and rebukes from higher courts. By December 2, 2009, 6 individuals were arrested charged with providing assistance to Clemmons before and after the shooting. 5 were accused of providing such assistance to Clemmons as transporting him to several locations, providing him with money and cell phones, making arrangements for him to flee the state, and treating his gunshot wound from the Lakewood shooting, all with full knowledge of the crime he had committed. In June 2010, Clemmons' sister was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment for acting as a getaway driver. In December 2010, 3 of the 4 other suspects were convicted. On January 14, 2011, Pierce County Superior Court Judge Stephanie Arend sentenced accomplices Eddie Lee Davis to 10 years, 5 months, Douglas Edward Davis to 7 years, 6 months, and Latricia Nelson to 6 years, 2 months in state prison. One defendant was acquitted of all charges. All these convictions and sentences were reversed by the Washington Supreme Court in appeals in 2013 and 2014 because of prosecutor misconduct in the original trials. On May 2011, Dorcius Allen, the remaining suspect, was convicted of 4 counts of murder as the getaway driver for Clemmons and sentenced to 420 years in prison the following month. In January 2015, the Washington Supreme Court overturned his conviction and ordered a new trial, citing prosecutor misconduct similar to the earlier reversals. After being convicted in the retrial and sentenced, Allen's sentence was reversed on appeal. The High Court ruled that Allen was acquitted on aggravated murder in his second trial, and he could not be retried for aggravated murder. In response, the prosecutor's office retried him for first-degree murder. Allen maintains that he did not know that Clemmons intended to commit the crime, and believes that he had been a scapegoat for the public anguish and outrage evoked by the murders. After the second trial, the jury reported to the judge that they were unable to reach a verdict. Mike Huckabee was widely criticized for having commuted Clemmons' sentence. The evening of the shooting, Huckabee released a statement noting the roles of the parole board that freed him in the criminal justice system, which Huckabee said had repeatedly failed to properly handle Clemmons. In his statement, Huckabee said, "Should he be found to be responsible for this horrible tragedy, it will be the result of a series of failures in the criminal justice system in both Arkansas and Washington state." Huckabee, who was considered a favorite in the Republican Party presidential nomination in 2012, claimed that the situation was used as a political weapon against him. Clemmons has been compared to Willie Horton, a convicted felon who was furlonged from Massachusetts prison in 1986, but never returned and committed more violent crimes several months later. The Horton case eventually factored into the 1988 presidential campaign of Democratic Party candidate Michael Dukakis, who was the governor of Massachusetts at the time in support of the furlong program. Timothy Egan, opinion writer for the New York Times, said of Huckabee's role in the Clemmons release, "If this case does not sink the presidential aspirations of Huckabee, it should." In his book about the shooting, The Other Side of Mercy, Jonathan Martin of the Seattle Times wrote that Huckabee apparently failed to review Clemmons' prison file, which was thick with acts of violence and absent indications of rehabilitation. Martin also suggested that Huckabee failed to ensure Clemmons' post-release plan was solid or even factual. In an article for the Times, Martin wrote that if Huckabee was serious about running for president in 2016, he'll have to answer to the Maurice Clemmons problem. Some university professors, criminologists, and attorneys speculated that U.S. governors will become more reluctant to grant pardons and clemencies to convicted felons in order to avoid the negative publicity faced by Dukakis and Huckabee in the Horton and Clemmons cases respectively. A public memorial service for the four slain officers was held December 8, 2009 at the Tacoma Dome. The day began with a 10-mile procession from McChord Air Force Base past the Lakewood Police Station to the Tacoma Dome. Over 2,000 police and fire vehicles from over 150 different law enforcement and fire agencies participated in the procession, which took 5 hours to complete. Over 20,000 people, mostly from law enforcement, emergency medical services, and firefighting communities, attended the service at the Tacoma Dome. Police officers from as far away as New York City and Boston, as well as a large contingent of Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers, NCOs, and constables, along with officers and paramedics from the British Columbia Ambulance Service, were in attendance. Lakewood's mayor and police chief spoke, followed by eulogies by family, friends, and colleagues of the four officers. Washington Governor Christine Gregory also spoke, saying, "We will remember them today. We will remember them always." The service concluded with a played recording of a police dispatcher attempting to call each officer with no response, and the dispatcher declaring each officer as gone but not forgotten. The officers' remains were buried in private ceremonies by their individual families. The memorial was logistically complex. The agencies preparing for the memorial services expected 20,000 law enforcement personnel to take part. 1,000 emergency vehicles and police cruisers followed the families of the victims to the Tacoma Dome. The site of the murders reopened 2 weeks after the shooting. The business later changed ownership and became the Blue Steel Coffee Company. A memory to the slain officers appears near the site. Alright, if you want to go to the location of the 2009 Lakewood shooting, you go to 11401 Steel Street South, number 108. So it used to be Forza Coffee Shop, but now it is currently called Blue Steel Coffee, as you can see here. So the shooting occurred inside the coffee shop. Clemmons went inside, shot all four officers, and left, eventually walking down the street where his getaway pickup truck was waiting for him. He was caught 2 days later at a different location, and that's where he was murdered by the police officer during a standoff at his vehicle. So there you go, so you guys can see where it is. This is the coffee shop. That's the side of it. Be sure to subscribe if you're not subscribed. Share if you want. Honestly, it helps more than anything. Also, if you guys would like to add a location to my map that isn't on my map, email it to me at truecrimetravelmap@gmail.com. If If you guys would like to follow me, I'm a stand-up comedian. You guys can follow me at Mike Mazzolotti or go to the Find My app and request my location. That's it. Thanks for watching, and as always, Godspeed, Dark Travelers.